A look at satellite of what's expected to become Tropical Storm Isaias. Some models pointing to a weekend arrival here in the southeastern United States. Others have it weakening drastically or missing us entirely. We are live here to bring you the latest on tracking the tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live in our hurricane headquarters. Alongside joining the program again, News Nation Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon joining us from Chicago, Illinois. Really important to note before we get to the latest forecast models here with potential Tropical Cyclone 9, this is not Isaias yet. Could become a named storm here. Could become Isaias in the next 24 to 36 hours, but as of right now, it is potential Tropical Cyclone 9. We're also going to be getting to your hashtag-based questions in the Facebook Live comment section with the hashtag #HeyAlbert, hashtag #HeyIan, hashtag #HeyJB. That's coming up in about 5 minutes' time. Before we do that, everybody, let's get to the very latest with Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver live at the wall. Ian, again, not Isaias yet, but that could change in about 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah, JB, that is the key point. So for now, this is just the same old area of low pressure that we've been tracking across the tropical Atlantic over the last several days. A broad circulation still at this point. You may have heard it referred to as Invest 92L. It's really struggled to kind of consolidate into a single center of circulation over the last couple of days. That's still happening to an extent. You can see on the visible satellite there is a broad overall circulation. These winds out of the west here and out of the east on the north, we see two separate plumes of convection, one to the north and east and one back to the south and west, as the circulation is still kind of an ellipse at this point. But the National Hurricane Center believes in the next 12 to 24 hours or so, this will be able to tighten up, become a well-defined center of circulation, and at that point it'll be a tropical storm. It'll get upgraded at that point, and in fact hurricane hunters will be flying into the storm later on this afternoon. If they find that, you'll see that instant bump up to what will be Tropical Storm Isaias. So for now, its motion is off to the west at 23 miles per hour. That's racing at this point, dealing with a number of different factors. So we're going to have to watch that as we move through the short term. This is the first forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, and they explicitly say with this forecast that there's a lot of uncertainty, both related to the track long term, also the intensity long term. It's very difficult for forecast models to get a hold on a storm that essentially hasn't formed yet. So we have to wait for that to happen. We'll get some good information from the hurricane hunters. You will see this track change over the next several hours. So you see this name, it's a mouthful, potential Tropical Cyclone 9, much longer than what we've been calling it over the last several days. This designation is important though. The National Hurricane Center started doing this a few years ago, back in 2017. And what this is saying is that although this isn't a tropical system just yet, it's not a tropical depression or a tropical storm by definition, it is expected to become one and impact land in under 48 hours. And what this does is it allows them to put out advisories, this forecast track that you're seeing on your screen, and it also allows them to issue warnings. And tropical storm warnings have been issued for Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the Leeward Islands at this point, parts of the Antilles. So the forecast track to the west-northwest over the next several days, becoming a tropical storm. Still a lot of uncertainty long term though. So I know a lot of folks are curious about the spaghetti plots, the forecast models. You saw in the short term that general trend towards the west-northwest. Then as whatever it looks like at that point approaches the Florida Peninsula, there is a turn towards the north. There'll be high pressure out in the Atlantic, high pressure forecast to be in the Gulf by the end of the week, and there's a weakness right in between, and that should allow the storm to pass off to the north from there. Now there are a number of considerations long term, as I mentioned, not only with the track but with the intensity, and I wanted to show you this because of it. What you're seeing here, I know there's a lot happening on the screen with these colors. It's a forecast model that's taking into account all the factors that tropical storms need to intensify: sea surface temperatures, atmospheric moisture, and wind shear, and it's basically combining them all into one metric: favorable or unfavorable. So for us, green is good, green is bad for a tropical storm. Red means conditions are highly favorable for development. And what you're seeing in the short term, this is tomorrow afternoon, evening, conditions in the short term are actually fairly good for development. So that's why the National Hurricane Center is forecasting this system to finally consolidate itself, develop that center of circulation, and then reach that tropical storm status. But why I wanted to show you is by the end of the week, as this system moves into the Bahamas and points north from there, you see some of that green. That's indicating conditions that are highly unfavorable for development of a tropical system that would likely lead to weakening or even dissipation of this system. So there's still a lot that we don't know long term. Again, the storm hasn't even developed yet. Showed you the conditions that were unfavorable for development. This will be part of it. Part of the story so far this tropical season has been these plumes of Saharan dust, which are normal, but they've been pretty pronounced at times over the last couple of months. This is Friday at 6 o'clock. You see this healthy plume of Saharan dust just off to the north and east of this overall circulation. And that dust features very stable air, very warm air, and very dry air, none of which tropical systems like. So there is some question here. How much of that dry air gets entrained into this center of circulation? What does it look like at that point because of that Saharan dust and some of the other factors that are unfavorable for development as we move towards the end of this week and into the early portion of the upcoming weekend. So it's been very active over the last several weeks. We've already crossed off one whole column in the 2020 Atlantic season. We had our first hurricane develop. That was last weekend. It was Hannah, made landfall in South Texas. The possibility, JB, that we could be talking about Isaias over the next 12 to 24 hours developing. But as I mentioned, there are still a lot of questions long term where this thing is heading and how intense it'll be. JB?
Thank you, Ian. Everybody, again, live here on Tracking the Tropics. We are going to be doing a hashtag-based Q&A here in a few moments using the hashtags that you see on your screen, especially hashtag Hey Ian and hashtag Hey Albert. We're going to be taking your questions from Facebook Live and posing them to our two experts, our meteorologists here from different areas of the country. And that brings us to Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon joining us here, everybody, from Chicago. Recently named Chief Meteorologist at News Nation, 15 years or so covering weather in Texas. And yeah, News Nation launching September 1st on WGN America. Hey, great to have you back on the program, Albert.
Good to be back on the show, and I feel like we're going to be hanging out a lot this hurricane season.
Got a lot happening already. It's been busy so far. On to that second column of names, as you saw already. But your thoughts, Albert, on what we're talking about here with potential tropical cyclone number 9?
Well, it's just how fast this hurricane season has ramped up. Last week, Hannah was the earliest H storm, the earliest 8th named storm of the season that we've had on record. Before that, it was Harvey in 2005, and 2005 is kind of the hurricane season of record, just how destructive and how busy it was. And this isn't Isaias yet, but it looks like it's going to be later this week. And the old record for the first I storm of the season was also back in 2005 with Irene, and it looks like we'll beat that record by about a week. So we just got to hunker in and just keep an eye on the tropics so closely, and remember that the peak of hurricane season isn't until the second week of September, so we have a long road to go. This one, we're keeping an eye on it for sure. It looks like it's probably going to become a tropical storm either tomorrow or a little bit later on this week, and that's why the Hurricane Center has decided to issue those tropical storm warnings already for the British and U.S. Virgin Islands as well as Puerto Rico. So there's some pretty good confidence in the next 2 or 3 days. But beyond that, there's still a lot of uncertainty. You're looking at the cone of uncertainty right there. And I don't want folks in Miami to say, we're going to get slammed this weekend. Anywhere in that cone, as far south as the Keys and as far north as Jacksonville, that center of circulation could end up. And a lot can happen, Ian, right, in the next 4 or 5 days.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've seen here over the last couple of days and a lot of uncertainty with this system. It was thought that this would actually kind of wrap itself up significantly quicker, and it's taken its time. It stayed broad. It stayed very elliptical over the last couple of days. So we're talking about a storm system that hasn't formed yet, and forecast models at this point are just making their best guess where this system is, because where it is at time zero, that oftentimes, Albert, is the most important factor where this thing is heading long term. You have to know where you're at, the current state of the atmosphere. So that's going to be very helpful later on this afternoon when the hurricane hunters get into the system, sample it, see what it looks like right now, how healthy it is. That'll tell us a lot about what's going to happen long term.
I think speaking of forecast models, one thing that is super interesting is that the global models, we talk about the GFS, the American model a lot, we talk about the European model a lot, they're in unusually lockstep even 4 or 5 days down the road. One thing that the global models have done well, not only this hurricane season, including Hannah last week, but in previous hurricane season. They've done okay to well when it comes to where the system is going to impact. One thing that they haven't done well, including with Hannah last week, is the intensification forecast. And that's something that we definitely want to keep an eye on. Seawater temperatures where this potential tropical cyclone is right now, anywhere from 82 to 84 degree Fahrenheit. And as it gets a little bit closer to the Florida coast, it'll be a little bit warmer. But I think one reason why we're probably not going to see rapid intensification, and Ian, you mentioned this in your big forecast a few minutes ago, is it's currently in a sheared environment. There's mid-level winds that are fast moving above this tropical system that's not going to allow it to blow up into a hurricane. But down the road, as it gets closer to the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas, there's less wind shear there. There's slightly warmer seawater temperatures. And I think that's kind of when we need to watch for it to maybe strengthen into a stronger tropical storm.
Everybody, we're going to open up the Q&A portion here on Tracking the Tropics. If you've been with us here before in the program, you know how this works. The two meteorologists beneath me on the right side of your screen, Tracking the Tropics meteorologist from WFLA, Ian Oliver, in the middle right-hand portion of your screen, and then Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon joining us from News Nation, WGN America, again, launching September 1st. So we're going to be getting to some of your Facebook Live questions. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, using the hashtags that you see underneath their names, hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey Albert. If you use those hashtags with your question, we'll pluck them out of the Facebook Live comment section and pose them to the meteorologist that you tag. So let's get to our very first comment, and it comes in from Naisha Irizarry from WFLA's Facebook page here in Tampa, and hashtag Hey Albert, wanting to know, is it coming to Tampa? Albert?
So Tampa is included in that cone of uncertainty, but you notice on that day 5, as we get this weekend, it's a very large cone. So as far as Tampa goes, want to watch this closely. One of the global models, the GFS, wants to even kind of get this out in the Gulf of Mexico. That's why that cone does include at least a little bit of the far eastern Gulf of Mexico. But notice on the flip side, some want to keep it well away from even the Florida coast. So as we look at this forecast cone, let's just talk about the impacts that could happen. And again, that point, that center, that latitude and longitude of the center of circulation could be anywhere in the red. And notice it can be as far south as Cuba. If it were to take that far southern track, it's going to go through a lot of terrain. It's going to go through the islands of the Greater Antilles, including Hispaniola, the mountainous areas of Cuba, and it would probably be a big rainmaker, but a weaker storm. On the flip side, if it took more of that northerly track that you see in the red, Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, it's over the warm waters of the Atlantic, will have more time for development, could be a stronger system. So Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, the Keys, everyone wants to watch this. In the short term, Puerto Rico really wants to watch this one closely, as tropical storm warnings are already in effect for the island of Puerto Rico.
Again, taking your questions from Facebook Live, everybody, with Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon, Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver, using hashtag Hey Ian or hashtag Hey Albert. We'll be looking for the questions that we have coming in here on Facebook Live. And the next one, we've talked about this on previous episodes, but I want to bring this up here again. David Fassel from WFLA in Tampa, hashtag Hey JB. One thing no one talks about are shelters and how they're going to handle COVID-19. So I want to bring this up for all of us here to all of us have a little bit of a conversation about this, Ian and Albert. Just from, again, a news perspective, I am not a meteorologist. I cover news here in Tampa Bay and here for the state of Florida. And I can tell you that, of course, with the rising numbers that we have with COVID-19 and how we've seen now a record single-day increase for deaths here in the state of Florida because of COVID-19, social distancing paramount right now, folks wearing masks, doing their part out here in Florida is so paramount right now. But Ian, we've talked about this on previous editions. If we have a major storm situation here in the state of Florida and people have to, be forced into shelters, they're going to be in close proximity situations, and that, of course, is a recipe for disaster for COVID-19.
Absolutely, that's a worst case scenario, and this is really more of an emergency management question. But emergency managers locally, especially with what we've been dealing with here in the state of Florida, have been preparing for this, and there'll be protocols put into place should this happen. Far too premature to say with this one. In fact, my thinking with this would be that is not going to be necessary with this particular storm. But you see that we're in the midst of a very active hurricane season. So those protocols will be put in place. I would imagine it's going to involve as much mask wearing, social distancing as possible within these shelters, JB.
And Albert, I would imagine that News Nation, I mean, as far as when you're covering, 50 states across the country, you're covering really an entire nation's worth of news. This is going to be a topic of conversation if we have that big major storm hit the United States.
For sure. It's only July the 28th. The peak of hurricane season is more than a month away. Got to go to the second week of September, and I hope local and state officials are taking note of the busy hurricane season that is already on tap, because it's only going to get busier. Not saying that we're going to get a direct hit anywhere along the Gulf Coast or even the East Coast. Even with this storm, you can see the model data. There's still some uncertainty, but we should be ready in these unprecedented times with COVID-19 ongoing. And what are we going to do whenever we do have at some point it's going to happen. We do have a major hurricane out in the Atlantic or Gulf spinning, and it's maybe headed towards the coastline.
As we continue to take your questions on Facebook Live, the next one coming in from Bobby Curtis Shehorn from WKRG in Alabama, the Gulf Coast area of Alabama, and looking beyond potential tropical cyclone number 9, and it's hashtag Hey Ian, do we have any more waves out by Africa?
There are, and we're getting to that point of the season, unfortunately, August, September, especially when we look to that main development region of the tropical Atlantic for tropical waves emerging off the coast of Africa. Good news right now, there is no tropical waves emerging right now that are highlighted by the National Hurricane Center with a probability of potential development. This is one that, coming off the coast of Africa, has had a probability on it the whole way. In fact, over the last few days, it's had a pretty good probability of developing into a tropical system. It stayed very broad, and that's a challenge for the system to tighten up that center of circulation and intensify. That process has to happen before any appreciable intensification can really start to be underway, if you want to say. So that tropical wave has been struggling to do so. Now it's entering the environment over the next couple of days, as Albert was saying. That's going to be a little bit more favorable for that to occur. But in the short term, this is the only part of the Atlantic that we're staring at, which was, of course, not the case last week when we had a very busy situation. But this is one we'll be watching very closely over the next several days. Still a lot of questions that need to be answered with this one.
And a lot of questions coming in on Facebook Live. We're going to try to get to as many from as many different cities across the United States. To all of you joining us here on Tracking the Tropics, we appreciate you having you with us here, whether or not you're watching on an app or a website or a social media platform. But back to Facebook Live from Kelly Moorer from Wavy's Facebook page in Virginia, hashtag Hey Albert. What are the odds at moving north to North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia?
Well, that's a possibility for sure, because as you see in that 5-day cone of uncertainty, some of the forecast data wants it maybe even to take a little bit more of a curve northward. So what's driving the track? Let's talk about that. We have a big area of high pressure centered over the central Atlantic. We call that the Bermuda High. And that's the reason why this system is moving off towards the west right now. And then that curve that you see, maybe a little bit more towards the north, is because some of the models want to have that high nudging off towards the east just a bit, kind of opening up a lane for the system to move up towards the north. So there's a look at the latest forecast tracks. These are what we call spaghetti models. Each one of these lines indicates a different model we look at. You can see there's a pretty good consensus, even 4 or 5 days out, headed towards the southeastern Florida coast, but there are some that want to make it even up towards the north of the Bahamas and curve a little bit more towards the north. So Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even up towards Virginia, nothing to be overly concerned and panicky about, but something that you want to check in on at least a couple of days, a couple of times a day, to make sure you're up to date on the latest track. Because as we saw with Hannah, the track can change a bit, but the intensification forecast can change a lot as well. So that's why we're doing these Tracking the Tropics shows, to make sure that you're in the know, you know what's going on, and we'll be keeping you updated all week long.
Yeah, more editions of Tracking the Tropics coming your way, everybody. The next question coming in from Monica Wilson from WSAV's Facebook page in Savannah, Georgia, hashtag HeyJB. What is the wind speed required to be a hurricane? You know, it's funny that Monica brings this up, because I was looking this up. I was doing a refresher for my basic tropical storm hurricane knowledge, but I'll, of course, bring up our meteorologists here on camera. They're the experts, you guys. The question there coming in from Facebook Live.
Yeah, Monica making me feel bad that I didn't put the Saffir-Simpson scale graphic that we have in the rundown for today's show. But yeah, 74 or better, you get to that Category 1 strength. First, we're going to be talking about a tropical storm with this one. We've seen some buoys indicating some winds up around 40 miles per hour. That's why you probably saw in our graphic there. If I can back it up a little bit, we're talking about a potential tropical cyclone 9 with maximum sustained winds of around 40 miles per hour. You're saying, why isn't that a tropical system? Well, it doesn't have that well-defined inner core, that center of circulation with convection, rising air, thunderstorms wrapping all the way around that center of circulation. So basically it's a structure problem right now with this. But once the hurricane hunters get into this system later today, don't be surprised if you get a push alert on your phone, JB, and it's saying, hey, we have a new tropical system. It's because that's what they've found. We haven't seen that happen over the last couple of days, and that's why this has been a little bit slow to develop. But that's what we are expecting to see happen in the next 12 to 24 hours. And I should point out, Albert was talking a little bit about the spread in the forecast model. Explicitly, in the first discussion from the Hurricane Center, this uncertainty is pointed out. There is a lot of uncertainty, especially in days 3 to 5 of that forecast track. So that's why it's not one to panic about at this point. You want to stay informed. You want to have your plan in place should something develop, have some extra time over the next several days. But in the short term, there's still a lot that we need to find out about this disturbance. You got to go back to Gonzalo. We had Gonzalo with some of the high-res forecast models were painting out. I was getting a little bit nervous, to be honest. Category 1, Category 2 hurricane. That system moved into the southeastern Caribbean, ran into some sinking air, very stable air, and it went splat, essentially, and that dissipated right where it was in the southeastern Caribbean. Global models actually had that. The GFS, the Euro, I know a lot of times people want to know how these models are performing as we go through the season. Both the global models actually had that. The global models with this actually keep a weaker circulation. I think it's going to be the impact of some of that wind shear and the dry air. Some of those higher resolution models do have a bit of a stronger solution, but they do also have an upside bias towards producing stronger storms. So what does all this mean? It means we don't know at this point. We need to get more data. We need to get the hurricane hunter in this storm, dropping those drops on, sampling the system. We'll get more satellite data, and we'll run more forecast models. Once we see some agreement, which there is very little at this point, then we're going to start talking about a higher confidence forecast. So basically the point of this broadcast today is just to tell you that this exists. It's likely to intensify in the short term, and we're watching it for you very closely long term.
And let's get to right on that point, right on cue, everybody. Debbie Ventura from Wavy's Facebook page in Virginia, hashtag Hey Albert, when are they sending in the aircraft to investigate it this evening? Of course, we're always trying to stay, in lockstep with the hurricane hunters, and when they're sending aircraft into these storms to gather this very, very precious scientific data, what do we tell to Debbie here from Wavy's Facebook page in Virginia?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a hashtag Hey Ian, because Ian knows a little bit more about the hurricane hunters than I do. Ian, what have you heard from the National Hurricane Center?
I know that they're going this afternoon into the evening. I haven't seen their actual flight plan, but I know at some point this afternoon, the early part of the evening, they'll be in there and we'll have much more information.
That's a lengthy flight. I mean, coming from stateside, going into something that's still well east of Puerto Rico. So that's going to be a lengthy flight. But as soon as we have any updates, of course, we'll keep you posted, everybody, here on Tracking the Tropics from our hurricane headquarters. Let's get to another question. Oh, nope, that was the one we just saw from Debbie. Let's get to this question. Another Debbie Ferran from WMBB's Facebook page. That's in the Panama City area of the Florida Panhandle. Hashtag Hey Ian, doesn't it look like the dust is far enough east to create a lane for this storm to grow?
That's an interesting question, and I should point out that dust product is also a forecast model. So you can't trust that as gospel either. It's a forecast model's thinking of where the dust will be at that point. So what we're looking at with that turn to the north is the area of high pressure that Albert pointed out, the Bermuda High. We're expected to have high pressure in the Gulf of Mexico and a trough in the southeast. That's kind of the avenue for that turn to the north, as whatever the circulation looks like at that point approaches Florida, the Bahamas, and starts making that turn to the north. But yeah, the proximity to that dust is a question mark, and it's a pretty good plume. It's off to the north. As it starts to organize and you get that circulation and inflow into the system, now it's actually going to be pulling some of that dust towards it, perhaps pulling that into the inner core, which can start to inhibit development a little bit. So there are some question marks with that. To an extent, that was what we saw with Gonzalo. Dry air was a big issue for Gonzalo. So that's something that we have to watch. But it does show you how in June and July, that's a big part of the picture is the Saharan dust and the overall profile of the atmosphere that can feature some dry air, some wind shear. Once we get into August and September, unfortunately, we don't really have as much of that as our friend, so that's why you do start to see some more intense tropical systems later in the season.
We got 2 more questions coming in, you guys. The final 2 questions, and the first one is from Shanna Crone-Schwartz from KARK's Facebook page in Arkansas. Hashtag Hey Albert, heading to Gulf Shores on Friday for the week. What's the chance for there? Gulf Shores, my old stopping grounds, that's the Alabama Gulf Coast, not too far away from the Florida Panhandle. So we got some folks joining us here from the north side of the Gulf. What do we say to Shannon, Albert?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to keep an eye on it. I wouldn't cancel your plan right now, but as you saw in that 4 or 5 day forecast cone, at least part of the Gulf of Mexico is included. So again, that point, that center of circulation can end up anywhere in that red. It could end up even back off towards the west of even Fort Myers, or it could end up back off towards the east of the Space Coast. So there's still some uncertainty there. I'd keep with your plans, but stay connected, stay plugged in. And also to answer that previous question about the hurricane hunters, I just looked up the flight plan. There's one headed into the system right now, and then there's a secondary flight scheduled just after midnight tonight, and one bright and early tomorrow as well. So the hurricane hunters, they're already getting practice with Hannah last week, and they're getting, I think, plenty of practice this week with this one. And I'll say it again. I know this is about the 3rd time I've said it. It's only July 28th. We still have a long way to go. And with that being said, if you are in particular Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, Florida, your anxiety is going to be up all season long. You got to bring it down. You just got to get the good information from a trusted source, like here on Tracking the Tropics. Stay plugged in. Don't get overly concerned or panicky about stuff like this, because it is going to be a long season. And we've got enough going on in our world aside from hurricane season. So just stay informed, and you'll be good.
Albert wasn't going to get off stream here with us on Tracking the Tropics without answering that question, so he was able to look it up here for us mid-show, everybody. Big props to Albert, who's joining us again from Chicago, from WGN America, News Nation Now, again, launching September 1st. Be sure to look out for it. It'll be good to see Albert on the program. And the final question that we have coming in here, everybody, is from Edwin Andrade from WFLA's Facebook page here in Tampa. Hashtag Hey Ian. Anything to expect to hit South Texas again is what Edwin is wondering. I'm going to bring you guys both in here for this one, because, of course, we're talking about what Hannah did over the past week. And also, Albert, your ties to Texas, of course, being a meteorologist there for an extended period of time. Ian, why don't we start here with you? Just the chances of this swinging that far west?
Yeah, and I think it's natural to be concerned about that when you go through what we just saw with Hannah. But with this one, I would say the odds of that are extremely small. You see that forecast cone of uncertainty. There is that turn to the north that's expected. So for the far western part of the Gulf with this one, again, it's very early, but I would say that this particular system, while you should watch it, you should be watching everything this time of the year. For folks that especially live here on the Gulf Coast, it's part of life. But this one, I think, is probably going to be all right. Albert?
100% agree with you. Yeah, 100% agree. It's a long hurricane season. Can't say we can't have something else impact the Texas coast later on, but the chances of Isaias, or what's going to be Isaias, say that 3 times fast. It doesn't look like it's headed towards Texas. One question that I have, or one question I've been getting, is what's up with this potential tropical cyclone? What are we talking cyclones about? So a cyclone is anything here in the northern hemisphere that has counterclockwise rotation, clockwise rotation in the southern hemisphere. And the reason why you're seeing that is a couple of years ago, the National Hurricane Center decided to have what you see there at the top of the screen, potential tropical cyclone 9. It allows them to push these 5-day forecasts out and not have to wait for it to be officially designated as a tropical depression, officially designated as tropical storm Isaias. So this is it's a great public servant from the hurricane experts in Miami at the National Hurricane Center to give us that forecast and not have to wait for something to be official, at least to go down in the book. So that's why you see that verbiage cyclone in that banner.
It's a long name. It sounds weird, but it's actually really important that they made this change, because it allows them to not only put the forecast out, it allows them to put warnings out, which we saw a number of tropical storm warnings issued: Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, parts of the Antilles. It allows people to get prepared, because we know in the tropics things can change quickly.
And it allows us to track the tropics here, of course, on your app, on your website, on your social media platform. We've been talking about News Nation. You might not have heard of News Nation on WGN America, and that's because it hasn't launched yet, launching September 1st. And as far as leading the weather department there, it's going to be the man here on the left side of your screen, Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon. Albert, your final thoughts here as we get a little bit closer to September 1st on WGN America.
Yeah, we're going to be in 75 million households and use the resources of hundreds of meteorologists and thousands of journalists across the country. You can go to WGNAmerica.com. At the top right, there's a channel finder. You can find out what channel it is going to be in your local area. And we're excited for you to see the Weather Center, the set, the newsroom, and, of course, to see our wonderful product. All kicks off at 7 p.m. Central, 8 Eastern, September 1st. News Nation on WGN America.
Still a little bit of way to go, but we've had Albert on the program, and it's great every time we have him on, joining us again on Skype from Chicago at WGN America. Or actually joining us from home, I believe, is where Albert is at the moment. Great to have you on the program.
Not a bad gig.
Yeah, great to have you on the program, Albert. And for Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Ian Oliver, I'm JB Buno. We are back tomorrow, everybody, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, or sooner if we have an important development as far as potential Tropical Cyclone 9, which is likely, again, to become Isaias in the next 24, 36 hours or so. All of these updates coming your way on whatever television station's Facebook page or app or website that you're watching on. Be sure to stay in lockstep with your station's meteorologist to get the very latest on all the tropical activity that's out there. And, of course, stay with us here on Tracking the Tropics. Our regular episodes, Wednesdays, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. And then, of course, we have special editions of Tracking the Tropics whenever we're closely monitoring tropical activity, such as potential Tropical Cyclone 9. For Albert and Ian, I'm JB. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you in about 23 hours from now or sooner here on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.